Introduction to Ship Fitting, a brief tour of the wide world of ship equipment. Does that sound familiar?
A little bit.
Yes.
Cool. Very cool. All right. Let's, oh, and I see we've got somebody in the chat. Hello.
Yeah, that's me. I'm just showing. It's all working. Checking for you.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so general etiquette here. Please do set your microphone to push to talk or mute yourself in mumble. You're welcome to ask questions through mumble or through other means. But if you're not asking a question, please don't key up and let us listen to your heavy breathing or whatever. This questions indicator is a little bit old. The best places to ask questions are either in the Twitch stream or in Classroom Alpha class questions on Discord, or over Mumble, if you want to key up over Mumble. Those are the three forums through which we will be taking questions. And I'll be taking questions throughout the class, so feel free to jump in and ask a question via any of those means. We always say stay docked up while you're in class. I'm not going to give you a hard time about it if you do some high-sec mining while we're in class here, but don't go take your shiny Myrmidon Navy out to nullsec and get blown up while you're in my class. That would make me sad. What are we talking about today? Well, hopefully it's not a surprise to anybody that we're talking about ship fitting. So we'll go over a number of topics here. Most of these we're using the in-game, no, really all of these we're using the in-game ship fitting window. And we'll talk about how you use that window, how you can fit more stuff. We'll talk about module tech levels and sizes, and then modules that use scripts, and very important for fitting purposes in theory crafting, we'll talk about stacking penalties. And then we'll briefly touch on third-party fitting tools and have a Q&A, and then what I'm actually planning on doing is stopping the stream at that point, and then we'll mess around in Python a little bit. One of us will open up Python and we'll have a gander at that, because Python is fantastic. What is Python? Well, you'll find out at the end of the class. So you got to stick around. Eve. Always visually overwhelming, right? As it says here, that's a lot of stuff. We got all kinds of different things going on here on the ship fitting window, and this is even without the attributes showing. So, I'm not going to go through all of these right now because we're going to touch on them in a minute here. So this is just to give you an idea that, as with anything in Eve, it's complicated. This is a Manticore, right? Stealth bomber. Nemesis, excuse me, Nemesis. Okay, let's keep going. So we're talking about high slots first, going top to bottom. What do you use high slots for? Well, first of all, where are they? They're up here at the top where it says high slots. And that is, I don't know if they named them high slots first or if they put them at the top first and then said, oh, these are high slots because they're at the top. But in any case, chicken or the egg, doesn't matter. We've got high slots, and they're used for guns, missiles, mining lasers. It says here remote repairs, not local repairs, remote repairs. And then a few other cool things like cloaks and combaters, scanner probe launchers, tractor beams, some of the more obscure stuff like bridging modules and sinusoidal field act and things like that. You can check out that list on the wiki. I'll send the slides out later and you can actually go through and look at everything. But mostly what we care about for our day-to-day purposes is either guns, or remote reps for Logi, and then sometimes cloaking. So this Nemesis here has got, if you look up there, turret hardpoints and missile hardpoints. So we've got 5 high slots total, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and of them, 4 of them have modules in them. Now this ship can take up to 2 turrets, and it can have up to 3 missiles. Those are the maximi for each type here. So even though there's 5 high slots, you can't load 5 missile launchers. You can only load 3 missile launchers because there's only 3 missile hardpoints. And what we've got equipped here is a Covops cloaking device, and then 3 torpedo launchers and an empty high slot. I'm not particularly happy about that empty high slot, but if you're going to leave any slot empty, typically it's going to be a high slot. Why is that? We'll get into that later. Don't remind me if I don't cover that. Let's keep going here. Okay, so this is going to come as a shock to everybody. The middle set of slots on the right side are called mid slots. Whoa. Surprising, right? Mid slots are great. They do all kinds of complicated stuff. We use them for shield tanking. So if your ship is shield tanked, all those modules are going to go into the mid slots. Shield extenders, shield boosters, etc. Hardeners. We use them for propulsion modules, so afterburners, micro warp drives, and micro jump drives. We use them for tackle, like scrams and webs and warp disruptors. And E-War also goes in mid slots. Damps, jams, weapon disruption, that type of thing. And then relic and data analyzers if you're doing exploration. And there's more stuff too. I think maybe worth noting here, you can put tracking and guidance computers in here, which will improve the effectiveness, the range, or the application of your weapons. So they won't improve the damage, but they will improve your ability to either hit at long range or apply damage to enemy ships. And shocking again, low slots down at the bottom. This ship's only got 2 low slots. I'm sorry, the mid slots here are an afterburner. That looks like a guidance disruptor, or sorry, a tracking disruptor, and a scram, and an empty mid slot, which is incorrect. The ship is not fitted correctly. I'm shaking my fist. Now, low slots, what do you do with low slots? So you can put in armor tank, which is, and that's both buffer, like plates, resistance improvements, like multi-spectrum coatings, and repairs. So armor reppers of all varieties all go in low slots. Very important and super fun. This is where you put your damage upgrades. So this ship's got 1 ballistic control, which is a damage upgrade that gives about a 23% bonus to the torpedo damage of the high slot torpedo launchers. You can put speed upgrades in here, like nanofibers, and then a classic module that you'll see on most of our fits. You can put 1 and only 1 damage control in a low slot, and the damage control dramatically improves the hull and armor resist, and modestly improves the shield resist on the ship. So you'll see them on almost every armor or hull tanked ship, and typically you'll see them on shield tank ships as well, though they're not quite as effective there. Again, we got 2 low slots here. We got a ballistic control in 1. This ship is fitted incorrectly. It should not have an empty low slot. Questions so far? How are we doing?
Guess we're doing good.
Stunned into silence by my awesome teaching skills. Very good. Okay, so when I say that the ship is fitted wrong, there's 2 things I'm thinking about here. The first is that there are empty mid and low slots and an empty high slot. The second is if we look down here, we've got these two sliders for CPU and power grid. So the blue slider or bar or whatever you want to call it, arc, is the CPU arc. And you can see that we're using, we've got 451.7 CPU total on this ship. And of that, we've got 87.8 CPU available. So we've still got some CPU available for fitting. All of the modules that you put on the ship, with a handful of exceptions, use CPU. There's a couple like multi-spectrum coatings or nanofiber internal structures that do not use any CPU, but that's uncommon. And then the other slider, the red slider, arc, bar, whatever, is for power grid. So we've got 18 power grid available out of 47.5 total. I'm going to circle back on these in a couple here, but for now we can see that we've got both power grid and CPU available. And again, almost every module uses power grid, but a lot of modules only use one power grid. Very common to have modules that use one power grid and somewhere to 30 to 50 CPU. That's a common thing. So we've got a lot of room to put more stuff on this ship. And it says here on the left, there's multiple ways to increase your overall CPU and power grid. The most important of them is to train skills. We'll see the skills in a couple here. You can also put modules on the ship, either rigs or low slot modules that will increase your power grid or your CPU. And then you can plug implants in for a small boost in CPU or power grid. You have to choose which one with implants because they both use the same slot. Alright, so rigs. Back in my day, we didn't have any rigs. Now we got rigs. Rigs are great. So almost all rigs, like it says here, have a benefit and a drawback. And if you have a higher skill in rigs, it doesn't change what rigs you can fit. You can fit T2 shield rigs, for example, with no skill whatsoever in, I think you need shield rigging 1, but you have that, I think, to start out with by default. So you can fit T2 rigs without, say, T5 or level 5 skill in that, associated rigging skill, but your drawbacks will be higher because you don't have the skill trained as much. You can't remove rigs, so all the other modules you can remove, but unless you're in a T3 cruiser, rigs are permanent to the ship and can only be destroyed. Kind of like implants, where you can't pop them out and move them around. You put them in, and then once they're in, the only way you can get rid of them is to destroy them. And there's a whole bunch of different types of rigs, but this, I can't tell what type of rigs these are just looking at it here because the icons are shared across many types of rigs. I'm going to guess these might be CPU rigs based on the amount of calibration used. You've got ships across the board most ships have 300 calibration and 3 rig slots. T2 ships have the same amount of calibration and 2 rig slots. And some, like Navy and pirate ships, have less calibration. And there's no way to increase the calibration on your ship. If it's got 300, it's got 300. That's the end of the story. Down here at the bottom left, we got the cargo bay and the drone bay. Cargo bay is where you put your ammo, hey-oh, and your batteries. And other stuff if you need it. The sweet, sweet loot that you pick up from your fallen enemies, that kind of thing. And the drone bay holds your drones. Now, like it says here, they don't mix. So you can't launch drones from the cargo bay, although you can put drones in the cargo bay. And even if you've got a ton of room in your drone bay, you can't put sweet loot in there. You can only put drones in the drone bay. So we can track ship performance on the right side using ship attributes and simulation mode. And that'll let you simulate what your ship's going to do when you turn your modules on and you fire your missiles and do these kinds of things. Fires the missiles. So the attributes will show you your capacitor strength and how long your capacitor is estimated to last, and you can turn modules on and off to see the effect there. It'll show you your DPS, it'll show you your tank, that's offensive power and defensive power respectively. It'll show you how far you can target and your scan resolution, your speed and your align time or your agility, and what your drones are up to. And you can even, as is showing us here, simulate overheating. So in this case, the scram is overheated. Might be a point, but you know what I mean. Is overheated, and that's part of the simulation. If it's alright with you, I'm going to press on here, but yes, this entire class is being recorded. So you're welcome to review at your leisure. But if it's okay, I'll keep moving here, and then if you have specific questions, we'll circle back. Okay, fun stuff. So we'll start at the top, even though that's the last item on the list. We'll start with personalization. So we've got skins and emblems. I personally believe that you should have a skin on your ship to look fancy, even if it's just like biosecurity or exoplanets or something cheap. Now this ship's got a skin on it. Oh, look how fancy it is. So you buy yourself a skin, you'll make Yuri happy, or don't. It doesn't actually affect the performance of the ship at all. And then you can also put your Corp and Alliance stickers on here, which I think uses those new-ish Eve Mark things. I don't know much about that. That, again, doesn't improve performance. It just looks good. Now, the browser. No! The browser is a place where I spend more time than I should admit to. It lets you look for different kinds of equipment that you can put on a simulated fit. It lets you see the fits that you've got saved or that the Alliance has saved. So for example, if you want to see the Eve Uni Magic Merlin T2 fit, it's in the browser. It'll let you see community fits as well. If you've got communities that you're part of, you can see their fits that have been shared with you. And then you can also see your actual inventory. So this is another link to see what is in your hangars and your cargo hold. So your overall inventory. Oh, see? Now it's saying nice things about it. Hey, we went through the whole window. Pretty exciting, huh? Stop here for just a second. Questions, comments, concerns?
Well, you might get to it, but my issue is always overloading the CPU and power grid and not knowing which skills will affect it. I mean, some skills, when you right-click the item and go to show info, then you can see, but some items you don't know what skills, and it's kind of annoying to have to go into PyFA or something else to understand what it is. Like, how do we manage that in a simple way when we overload power grid and CPU and not, by have to using, because
That's not an easy question to answer. We're going to answer part of that question in a minute here, and then I will go off script and offer some additional commentary if that's all right.
sounds great.
All right, let's do it. So, thank you for the lead in. I'll give you your $10 for lining me up a little bit later on, or euros, or rubles, or whatever. Rupees. 10 rupees. So what we've got here, the primary skills that you're interested in for fitting ships, CPU management and power grid management are essential. They give you a significant boost to the amount of CPU and grid you get out of every ship that you fly. So aside from shuttles, every single ship that you fly will benefit from both of these skills. The next tier here of really useful skills are weapon upgrades, which is not a bad train and reduces your turret and launcher CPU required. And then, advanced weapon upgrades, which is a painful train. And it reduces your power grid by not very much per rank. But a lot of the time, if you're having trouble with a fit, what you'll usually find is that you're missing advanced weapon upgrades 5 or maybe even 4. And that puts you over power grid. So that's a very common reason to be over on power grid, because the train is like 25 days or something horrible like that. And I try to, when I create fits for the uni, I try to not go over 98% power grid estimate on an all 5 character, just because I know that a lot of people won't have advanced weapon upgrades 5. Electronics upgrades reduces CPU 5% for modules requiring the skill. We don't use a whole lot of electronic upgrades, so I can go back and look at what that entails, but it's relatively uncommon that this is going to be your problem in terms of putting the fit together. Shield upgrades are very important, on the other hand, for shield tanking. Makes a huge difference, because usually with shield tank we oversize the shield, and that's one of the largest power grid drains on your overall fit. So training this up to 5 is a really, really valuable use of your training time. And then we got energy grid upgrades. This is not a bad skill. It's worth bringing this one and electronic upgrades up to 4 anyway. But it's not usually the skill that's holding you back, with some fits being exceptions. And lastly, here's mining upgrades, which is a nice one for mining. But I don't do a whole lot of mining, so my skill is really bad at it. So let's think about this. I'm going to flip to the next slide and then I'll pontificate a little bit. Oh, good. Yeah, actually, this is going to answer part of the question too. So what if you don't have enough CPU or power grid to fly a fit? Well, you can modify the fit with a number of different modules or rigs, which will give you additional CPU or power grid. So a common thing to do, if you've got, say, 3 ballistic controls in your low slots and you're out of power grid, would be to remove a ballistic control and replace it with a reactor control unit, which will give you more power grid and reduce your DPS. So let me talk about these modules here, and we'll think about that a little bit. For CPU, the 2 modules that you can use a coprocessor, which is a low slot module, or you can use a processor overclocking unit rig. And they've got that impact of reducing shield recharge. Processor overclocking units also take up a lot of calibration. They're very expensive for calibration. They tend to be cheap rigs though. Now power grid. We've got more options for power grid. We've got what we call a micro auxiliary power core, and this gives you a flat 10 or 15 power, which a small ship will have power grid less than 100, so you can get anywhere from a 20 to a 10% bonus out of this, although like a frigate or a destroyer. But these are completely worthless on cruisers and up, because cruisers got power grid more in the 500 to a 1500 power range, and so a 10 power grid or 15 power grid bonus is not relevant. And that's why you would use either a reactor control or a power diagnostic system. On PvP fits, you'll typically see reactor controls. They give more power than power diagnostic systems. but the power diagnostic system has the advantage of improving your shield and capacitor. It's one of the, I think it's the only module that you can put in a low slot that improves your overall shield amount, and it also improves your shield recharge rate. And then last but certainly not least is an ancillary current router, which is a rig, and it gives you a decent boost to power grid. So you'll see a lot of fits using these modules, particularly for ships that are deficient in one way or another. Like if you look at a Praxis, it is weak on CPU, so it's very common to see a coprocessor or a processor overclocking unit on a Praxis to make up for that CPU deficiency. And for things like stealth bombers, a lot of the times you'll see a micro auxiliary power core so that they can fit a full set of torpedoes, a micro warp drive, and a bomb launcher. And a shield extender. All right. So let me circle back to your question. What remaining questions do you have out of that? Because that is as much as this presentation covers, but I know a few more things that I can share. Does that cover it okay? Or would you like to hear more? Ooh.
Don't mind hear more if you want, but like I said, bit problem is just being a bit new and actually not flipping them around in myself yet.
Yeah, so actually we are going to hop down to meta levels as well, as this is related. So what do we got here? This is a warp scrambler, and the module that we pulled up is a warp scrambler 1, and we're looking at the variations tab for that module. And you can see, what is it, 15 or so different kinds of warp scramblers that all behave similarly to a warp scrambler 1 but have different advantages and disadvantages. And there's this compare tool. So relevant for your question, let's talk about the initiated compact warp scrambler, third from the top, real quick. So if you are low on CPU or power grid, you can do what we call compacting down modules. Almost every module that you can equip to your ship has got a compact form. And the compact form, in some cases, only uses less CPU, and in some cases uses less CPU and less power grid. So a good example here would be if you're out of power grid on a fit, or sorry, CPU on a fit that has a warp scrambler 2, and you're out of CPU, you can use a compact warp scrambler that uses less CPU fitting space than a warp scrambler 2. The compact one is not as good, it has worse range, but it will actually fit, so you can turn it on. This is a warp scrambler that's off and offline is of no use to you whatsoever. So circling back to your original question, if you're having trouble fitting things, generally what I advise if you don't have time to train into the fitting skills you're missing is first, compact down existing modules. Second, if that doesn't get you there, replace a low slot module with either a coprocessor or a reactor control, depending on whether you need CPU or power grid, respectively.
And when you've done all of that and you still can't manage it, but somebody else that linked you to fit can, like how do I find the actual skills that I'm missing so I can inject them?
Very good question. So that's not easy to answer, unfortunately. The best thing you can do if you've got time is set up your character in Python, and Python will let you import the skills that you actually have, and then you can model which skills you're missing. So the skills that you could be missing, let's scroll back up, are CPU management, power grid management, both of the weapon upgrades, electronic upgrades, shield upgrades, energy grid upgrades, and sneaky one here that is not listed, the improvement or the rigs for weapons increase either power grid or CPU requirements. So if you're over on CPU and you're using missile launchers and there's a CPU rapid launch rig, that may be why you're over on CPU, in which case you can try tearing that rig off and not using it at all, or increasing the rigging skill. But it's not easy to do. The game does not tell you, hey, if you had Power Grid Management 5 and Shield Upgrades 4, you'd be able to use this fit. It just says you don't have enough power, which is probably what you found, right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think you explained it very well. Now I know what to do, so it's PIFA.
Yeah, PIFA's great. So we got the compare tool here, and we're looking at the different variations of warp scramblers. And we just picked out 3 of the possible things to look at: the CPU usage, optimal range, and meta level. And then meta group is here by default. So what you can see from this, let's talk about Warp Scrambler 1 versus Warp Scrambler 2 versus Initiated Compact, just to have a quick chat here. The Warp Scrambler 1 is the worst. Uses 30 CPU and it only has 7,500 meter optimal range, and it's meta level 0. Meta level 0 meaning the worst is bad. Very sad. Then we've got a Warp Scrambler 2, 5th from the top. This is the Tech 2 version. It has a higher skill requirement, so you need to have trained more skills. And you can see that it offers considerably better performance of 9,000 meters scram range, but also requires 6 extra CPU. That's pretty typical of Tech 2 modules. They typically require more fitting and give you better performance. I can't think of any cases where going Tech 2 actually decreases the fitting requirement relative to Tech 1. We've got other cool options too. So any of the 3, either Faint Epsilon Scoped, Initiated Compact, or J5B Enduring Warp Scramblers are better than a Warp Scrambler 1. They're just better in different ways. Epsilon Scoped has longer range at the same CPU. Initiated Compact has less CPU requirement, but the same range as Warp Scrambler 1. And then J5 Enduring Warp Scrambler, we don't actually have the relevant column on here. We'd have to have activation cost visible. But it has lower activation costs than a Warp Scrambler 1 at the same CPU and range. And then all these green modules down here, we've got Storyline, which is typically very low fitting and the same benefit as T2 for a significantly higher price. And then we got Faction, which are all over the place. So it's very hard to memorize what faction does what for any given module. But you can see the faction list here. Some of them have really low CPU requirements and great range, like the Fed Navy Warp Scramblers got 26 CPU and it is over 10 km in range. Some of them have got really low CPU, some of them have got really long range, so it varies in price and benefit as to what you get. And there's abyssals, but we'll talk about that some other time. Yeah, we'll talk about fitting windows both as part of the class and after the class. So hopefully we'll get to your question in a way that's useful. Module sizes. Yeah, okay. So this is complicated and I'm going to do my best to explain it in a simple way. You've got small, modules, which are for frigates and destroyers, medium modules, which are for cruisers and battle cruisers, and large modules, which are for battleships. And then there's capitals as well, but we're not covering capitals today. So a large micro jump drive goes on a battleship. A medium micro jump drive goes on a cruiser or battle cruiser. A battle cruiser, excuse me. Yeah, so there's really two types of modules, very, very, very broadly speaking. There are modules that require a lot of power grid, and there are modules that require one power grid. Generally speaking, the modules that require one power grid do not have sizes. So like a warp scrambler, which we just looked at, those warp scramblers all require one power grid and varying amounts of CPU. And it's just as valid to put a warp scrambler 2 on a frigate as it is to put one on a battlecruiser. It's not a sized module. Asterisks later. And similarly, like a multi-spectrum energized membrane, which improves your armor tank, is a module that requires one power grid and 36 CPU. And you can use it on any tier of ship: frigates, destroyers, cruisers, battlecruisers, and battleships. With the general trend of things being that as the ship gets larger, it has a bit more CPU. So a battleship is going to have 5 to 10 times as much CPU as a frigate, usually, but not always. And it's going to have a few more slots for fitting things as well. So a battleship is going to have more fitting slots than a medium or small ship. But power grid scales dramatically. So a frigate will have 50 to 100 power grid. Sometimes less than that, actually. I should say more like 25 to up to 75. Whereas cruiser or battle cruiser is going to have somewhere around 1,000, give or take. And a battleship is going to have considerably more, at least 10,000 or somewhere in there. So the scales of CPU and power grid are not equal. Like, they don't scale up evenly across ship types. And that's why the second type of module that uses a lot of power grid is very hard to fit on, like it's hard to fit a large shield extender on a cruiser. But commonly done. It's impossible to fit more than one large gun on a cruiser because you don't have enough power grid. And in most cases you can't fit any. They require more power grid than the ship has to fit even a single large turret. So most modules don't have sizes, but armor plates, shield extenders, and weapon systems are most notable for having sizes. And as it says at the bottom here, some fits use oversized or undersized modules. Oversized is very common for tanking. So, for example, it's very common to put a medium shield extender on a destroyer, or a large shield extender on a battle cruiser, or a large armor plate on a cruiser. Those are common things to do. Less commonly, you can also oversize propulsion modules. That's really a specialized thing, but if you got to go fast, a medium micro warp drive on a Punisher will go like 7 km a second or something horrible like that. I mean, it's insane. It won't be any good for fighting, but if you got to go fast, that's how you go fast. And you'll see people run obscure fits like overprop Myrmidons that go 4 km a second. The biggest challenges there being that your turning speed drops to, or goes up dramatically to as high as like half an hour. Or it's not half an hour, half a minute to turn around. And your tracking also is really bad. Hence why a Myrmidon with drones, your tracking doesn't matter, would be a good choice. So yeah, fun stuff. Undersized modules, the only undersized modules that I really ever see are capacitor boosters. So it's relatively common to see a small cap booster on a medium ship or a medium cap booster on a large ship. Otherwise, undersized modules are really uncommon. Oh, buddy. Now we get into heavy lifting. How are y'all holding up? Everybody doing okay?
Kinda.
Yeah. If you weren't struggling to keep up before, this stuff is. I tell people every time the developers had a choice in Eve, they must have decided to make it the most complicated answer possible. Because this stuff is, oh, buddy. All right.
So what fun would be make it easy?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. It's mentally engaging, but it's complicated. So let's talk about scripted modules, and in this case, we're talking about a tracking computer specifically. So a tracking computer is a mid-slot module, and it improves on its own, just by default, the range, fall off, and tracking speed of your turrets. So if you've got auto cannons and you put a tracking computer on there, it's an active module, you have to turn it on. Then it'll give you 5% increased optimal range, 10% increased fall off range, and 10% tracking speed. But we talk about scripts. So this module can be scripted, and when you throw in a tracking speed script, what you're telling the module is, I don't care about optimal range or fall off range, I want more tracking speed. So the tracking speed script knocks your optimal range bonus to 0, your fall off range bonus to 0, but it gives you a 20% bonus to tracking speed. Conversely, if you put an optimal range script in there, it drops your tracking speed bonus to 0, but it doubles your optimal range and fall off range bonuses. Common to see scripted modules like, very common to see range or target dampening modules with targeting range scripts, or scan resolution on sensor boosters or things like that. So they're common, and it's convenient that you can switch them fairly quickly. Within 10 seconds or so, you can flip out one script for another. If you're at long range, you want to have this optimal range script, and then if you close the distance with your opponent and they're now well within your optimal range, you may want tracking speed instead, so that you can hit them with their higher angular velocity, which you would have learned about yesterday if you were in my other class. Clear as mud?
So I understand it's option basically what's built in already into it, so you need you can swap around through them, like me in the script.
Right. Yeah, it's just like loading ammo, except they never run out. So a script is, you load it just like a piece of ammo, and then it changes the effect of the module.
So that's actual thing you need to get and load in. It's not actual just click and change it over. You need pre-prep for your script. I'm just trying to understand what the script is, kind of.
Yeah, it's an item that you put in your cargo hold, the script itself. And then in order to load it, you need to right-click on the module and load the script, or click and drag the script onto the module. So you do have to have cargo hold space to hold the script.
Yeah, okay. That's a bit more clear now.
All right, now we're going to talk about something extremely important and also head-scratchy. This is a huge thing for Eve, and in my opinion, one of the things that makes it the most different from a lot of other MMOs is that we have what we call stacking penalties. So what does that mean? It means when you equip multiple modules that affect the same attribute of the ship, typically, not always, but typically, there will be a stacking penalty. So in this case, we're looking at an inertial stabilizer, which, as it says here, improves ship handling and maneuverability. So what an inertial stabilizer does is it makes your ship turn faster. And, well, I'm trying to decide. I'd rather use, if you all would humor me, I'm going to talk about ballistic controls instead. Ballistic controls are a low slot module that improves the damage of your missile launchers. So ballistic control 2, if I'm not mistaken, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe ballistic control 2 with good skills improves your damage by 22.9%. So it's a little over a fifth of a damage improvement for all of your missile launchers. So if you equip 5 of them, that gives you over 100% bonus, right? Not at all. Totally not correct. The first one that you equip, the first ballistic control that you equip, gives you 100% of its 22.9% bonus. So you get a straight 22.9% bonus to damage from that first ballistic control. But if you equip a second one, you have a stacking penalty. So the column 2 here shows the stacking penalty, and what that means is that you only get 86.9% of the 22.9% bonus you would have gotten. I'm going to say that a couple more times because it's really confusing. But the upshot here is the second ballistic control gives you about 19 to 19.5% increase in damage, because it's only 87% effective due to the stacking penalty of having 2 ballistic controls. So if you put a third ballistic control on, that one is only 57.1% effective. So now you're down to probably around 14% damage boost from the third ballistic control. So if you've got 3, first one's 22.9, second one's about 19, third one's about 14. So rather than 3 times 22.9, so 69-ish damage bonus, you're only getting, let's see if I can do this math on the fly, y'all, 44, 58%, is that right? Something like that. Anyway, you're getting less than you would have if there was no stacking penalty. So let me stop here and ask who's got questions, because I know people have questions on this because it doesn't make sense. Everybody good? Think about it. Questions are welcome. So this is, from a fitting perspective, why you will rarely see, you'll often see like 2 ballistic controls or 2 gyro stabilizers or 2 multi-spectrum shield hardeners or 2 multi-spectrum coatings or 2 of modules like that affect the same attribute, because the first 2 give you by far the most effect. And then sometimes you'll see a third one, but it's uncommon to see, say, 4 ballistic controls on a ship or 4 multi-spectrum coatings. And the way this applies is kind of interesting in that typically it's the modules that only take 1 power grid and have a CPU requirement that have this effect. Whereas like if you're putting armor plates or shield extenders, I don't think they have stacking penalties that I'm aware of. And certainly not with guns or missile launchers. There's no stacking penalties for those. Each one of the guns that you put on your ship operates at full effectiveness with no stacking penalties. And you can see here there's a link to get the exact details. Fun fact for the floor: the reason that you see damage controls so often is that damage controls do not apply a stacking penalty to any other tank modules. So you can get 100% of the effect of a damage control and still get 100% of the effect of a multi-spectrum energized membrane at the same time. Even though they affect the same attribute, they both improve your armor resistance. There's no stacking penalty for a damage control. So that's part of the reason why they're so popular. Okay, here we go. I went over the example here, but we'll go through this example as well because this is a good one. There we go. I'm going to skip ahead and show the whole slide here. So what we're talking about here, to reiterate, we're looking at a scripted sensor booster. So a scripted sensor booster gives a 60% improvement to targeting range. So if your base lock range is 45 kilometers and you load a single scripted sensor booster, it increases your lock range to 72 kilometers, which you can see over there on the left. So that scripted sensor booster is 100% effective, and it takes you out to 72 km. Now, if you throw an information command burst on there, an information command burst is an area of effect thing that improves your targeting range. So in this case, we've got a good information command burst. The pilot has got good skills, and that increases your lock range by 34%. So with no stacking penalty, you go from 45 km to 60%, 72 km to an extra 34%, 96 km. That's if there were no penalty, and if you just applied those bonuses straight across the board. Over here on the right, see the actual number. The 34% gets hit by that stacking penalty, so it gets knocked down to 86.9% of its total effectiveness. So the first sensor booster that's scripted still gives you 60% times 100%, no stacking penalty, pushes you out to 72 km. When you add the information command burst, though, it only gives you 30% rather than the full 34. So you end up with 93 km range instead of the paper value of 96. Now, we're going to throw in 2 additional sensor boosters with no script. So they give you 30%, a sensor booster and a SIG amp, excuse me. The sensor booster gives you a 30% improvement in range, and the SIG amp gives you a 30% improvement in range for targeting. And on paper, if they applied fully, they would both net out to 163 kilometer targeting range. But in practice, the stacking penalty on the 230%, it doesn't matter which order mathematically, either way, they apply 57% and 28%. So rather than 30% from the first one, say the sensor booster with no script, you only get a 17% improvement in range. You're out to 109 km as opposed to 125. And then the last one is only 28% effective, so it bumps it down to 8%, and you only go out to 119 km total lock range as opposed to that theoretical 163. Math. What did you all do to deserve math? And the worth noting here that mathematically the game will take the best bonuses possible for you. So in this case, the 60% is applied at 100 and the 34 is applied at 86.9. That's how the game orders the bonuses. Whereas if you had 100% of the 30% and 86.9 of the 30%, and then only 28.3% of the 60%, you'd have much lower lock range. So the game works to your benefit by applying the least stacking penalty to the most valuable bonus, if that makes sense.
One question.
Yeah.
When the game, so let's say you're putting, let's say you're looking at agility. I heard Cadanzo told me the other night that agility rounds up to the nearest whole number. Like instead of, if you wanted to put mods on to where you could get your line time to 3.27, the game is actually going to make it 4. It's not going to make it 3.27. So, if you actually can't put enough, something that changes your agility to where it's, just below the whole number, then it's not worth putting extra agility items on if you can't get to that below that number. Is that true, or do you know?
Very good question, and it is true, broadly. So what he's talking about is your ship agility determines how quickly you align. and it's expressed in a number of seconds. So for example, you could have a ship that aligns in 2.75 seconds. But the way the game works, if you're trying to warp, you have to be fully aligned on the tick, the 1 second server tick, because the ticks are 1 second on the server. You have to be fully aligned in order to warp. So if you've got a 2.75 second align time and you hit warp and you start aligning, at 2.75 seconds there's no server tick. And when the server hits 3, then it says, oh, you were aligned a quarter of a second ago. Well, now you can warp. But at the same time, at 2 seconds, the server says, oh, you're not aligned yet, so you can't warp. So this is complicated stuff, but the upshot is that from a warping perspective, an align time of 3.01 seconds and a align time of 3.99 seconds are the same for warping.
Right, so it doesn't make any sense then to invest extra money unless you can actually get below that tick, right? I mean, my thing is if I was putting on extra agility items, and making investments in it, I need to make sure I get below that tick for each second.
Yeah. So
otherwise, it doesn't do any good.
You do gain a benefit from having better align time, even if you don't go down a tick, and that's for turning. So if you're on grid and you're orbiting something, your orbit can be tighter if you have better align time. So there is a small benefit there, but you'll almost never see anybody fitting for that. Maybe the only case where you'll really see that is with an overprop fit, where your align time is somewhere like 25 to 30 seconds, and throwing a module on there will bring it down by whole seconds anyway. So that's not usually something people fit toward, is angular orbit optimization. That's a very uncommon thing to fit for. Whereas warp time is a very common thing to fit for.
For me, the biggest item is cloak tricking. So as a hauler, I want to get align time, down to where I can warp the fastest from a cloak trick perspective.
Right, and so your conversation was correct. In your case, probably more like 7.01 is the same as 7.99 from a warping perspective.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, sure thing. Alright, third-party fitting tools. Pyfa is fantastic. Eve Workbench I don't use anymore. And there's also a JavaScript online fitting tool that you can use on your phone or on a non-Windows device. I think Pyfa runs on Linux as well. It runs on Windows and Linux and Mac, but it doesn't run on Chrome if I'm not mistaken, unless they've updated it. So there's and it doesn't run well or at all on a phone. But Pyfa is fantastic. We're going to spend a little time in Pyfa after I stop the recording here, and we'll think about that a bit. And I may show a little bit of the JavaScript online tool that you can use as well. But if you're serious about fitting, you should download and install Pyfa and work there, as it gives you more options than the in-game tool. Particularly, it gives you the option to model different levels of skills. So if you want to say, hey, what can I fit once I train Advanced Weapon Upgrades 4? You can set up your character and you can copy your character and say, okay, now if I have Advanced Weapon Upgrades 4, how's this different? Which is very useful from a modeling perspective. Or for my case, I'd say, okay, so what if I have just the base uni skill plan trained? What can I use? And if I'm building a ship for new friends, I'll use that skill profile, which is dramatically worse fitting skills than my skills, for example. Python also has cool charts and graphs and nice other things that you can do and tabs and stuff like that. So the UI is pretty good. Shameless plug. Yeah, and there you have it. That is the content for the class. As mentioned, we're going to stop the stream, but we will spend a little bit of time in Python here in a moment, and I'll go ahead and record that separately. So I'm actually going to stop the stream and then restart it and do a separate recording, so people who aren't able to attend can also get that info. But at this point, I'll open the floor for questions.